Okay, well, welcome everybody. This webinar is going to be hosted by myself, Jackie Swihart, and Abby Chapman of Indiana Main Street. And it's intended for local Indiana Main Street programs to use as they onboard new members to their organization. And so the following things we're going to cover today, we hope will assist local programs in orienting board members to what Main Street is and really what it means to be a board member. So these resources, they're intended to complement whatever board orientation materials that have already been created for your local program. There's no requirement to use this webinar or any of our resources. Rather, the intent behind this is to really help to fill potential gaps as local programs are onboarding new board members. So here's what we had in mind for the webinar. We'll start with a high-level overview of OCRA. We'll talk a bit about the National Main Street Center and how the Indiana Main Street program fits into OCRA's mission and vision. And then we'll take a deeper dive into what Indiana Main Street is, what we offer, what we expect. Most of our time today will be spent highlighting board responsibilities and expectations. And then we'll wrap up looking at how the role of the board and a board member in particular fits into other roles within the organization. So we'll start with our agency. We are a state agency, the Indiana Office of Community and Rural Affairs. We are housed within the Lieutenant Governor's family of business, so we're under the leadership currently of Lieutenant Governor Suzanne Crouch. And our vision is to work with Indiana communities to build relevant and economically thriving places where people want to live, grow, work, and play. And we really accomplish that vision by working with local, state, and national partners to provide resources and technical assistance to aid communities in shaping and achieving their vision for community and economic development. So today we're really going to be talking about Indiana Main Street, but I did want to just mention that our agency houses a lot of other programs as well that you may be familiar with. Programs include Community Development Block Grants, Stellar Communities Program, the Quick Impact Place-Based Grant Program, the Next Level Connections Broadband Program, the Historic Renovation Grant Program, Rural Opportunity Zones Initiative, and more. So all of these programs combine financial resources and capacity building support through technical assistance. But like I said, today we're really focused on Indiana Main Street. But if you do have any questions about those other programs, we can connect you to the right person within the agency. And on that note, we also like to promote the fact that OCRA has 6 community liaisons located throughout the state. Each liaison lives and works within their region, and so you can really think of them as your front door to government. They are here to help you on any OCRA-related programming, as well as connect you with partners and other state agencies as needed. So you can always refer to this map here if you're looking to connect with your OCRA community liaison. You can also note that if any of this information changes, if there's a change in staff, you can always click on the OCRA Community Liaisons hyperlink at the top. That'll take you to our webpage with the most up-to-date information on who your community liaison contact will be.
Okay, so like Jackie said, we wanted to give you a little bit of a background on our coordinating program, Indiana Main Street. And so really one important piece to know is that we are a part of a bigger network, meaning that yes, we're a state coordinating program and we work with our Indiana local programs, but we're also a part of the National Main Street Center, which services many coordinating programs across the United States. So we are a part of a bigger movement, which is a really exciting thing to get to be a part of. We really focus on that downtown corridor, the historic fabric, and the small business opportunity in that area specifically. So ultimately, we're encouraging this idea of economic development and revitalization, as well as preservation and development of the resources that your community already holds. So really at the heart of it, that's what Indiana Main Street is working towards. We also at the coordinating level, we provide support for implementation of these strategies to stimulate that long-term growth and pride in the heart of your community's downtown core. So again, you hear that word downtown core a lot. That's because we really, all of our main streets focus on a certain service area, typically the historic downtown area. So if you can go to the next slide. So in terms of what we offer with education and training, this is just lists a few, and we're hoping to continue to add to this list and meet the needs of our local programs. But at this time, we offer community exchanges, which community exchanges typically happen we do 5 usually a year, and they all are hosted by local communities. So typically we try to spread them out across the state, so you can go to one near your location. You don't have to travel super far. And they usually focus on one of the 4 points or a bonus topic. And it's a time for our Indiana Main Streets to get together, to network with one another, share ideas, and really learn from each other and their experiences. And so they're usually a day long, low cost, and a great opportunity. So definitely be on the lookout for those in 2021. And then we also have the Great Lakes Main Street Conference. This is a newer conference that we host with some of our Great Lakes partners. And we are really excited because this upcoming year in August, we'll be doing a virtual Great Lakes Main Street Conference. So again, be on the lookout for more information about that. But again, that's a time where all of our Indiana Main Street and some of your Midwest partners, so maybe some Main Streets from Ohio or Michigan or Kentucky, can come together to learn from each other and share best practices and hear from some great leaders in community development across the state and maybe even outside the state. So it's a really good time. We also are really encouraging of our local programs to attend the National Main Street Conference. Usually when it's in person, it's a bit of a higher cost, but extremely worth it. And this upcoming one, which Jackie, I'm forgetting the date now of this upcoming year, but it will be virtual. So it'll definitely be lower cost, and we're encouraging all of our groups to take part in that, just because that even widens the amount of people that you can connect with and network with. Did you find the date for that, Jackie?
No, I didn't. I tried to Google real quick, but I know it's in the spring. It's usually always in the spring. And I believe the cost for the virtual conference, the early bird price will be $99. So definitely more affordable. Check it out.
Yes, thank you. And then we also have a contract with the National Main Street Center. And with that contract, we get to, with them, them offer trainings specifically to you all and for Indiana Main Street. So we'll have those scheduled out for the next year. And Jackie's really good about sending out regular emails, letting you know about different trainings, when to register for them, timing of those. But you can also always go to our Indiana Main Street webpage under education and training. One thing I want to emphasize with that is that that shouldn't just be your board president or your executive director. That should be as many board members, maybe switch off on different trainings. That really gives an opportunity for all of you to kind of invest in what Main Street is and grow your own knowledge base. So definitely we encourage you to take part in that. So going from there, we also offer network resources. Again, this is kind of spurring on that idea of we want you to network with each other as well as have resources and tools at the local level. So one of those is our Indiana Main Street Facebook group. This Facebook group is open to anybody and including board members, not just, again, board presidents or executive directors. And it's a great space to share what you're learning, maybe questions you have for other people. We've been doing Facebook takeovers. So some of our directors have been doing takeovers and showing what their day looks like, even doing some trainings for us, which has been super cool. So we definitely encourage you, if you're not a part of that yet, it's the IMS COVID-19 network. That's what it's called at this point. And we would love love for you to join that. We also have an IMS education and training page on our website, like I said, and there's some really cool toolkits on that website that might help combat some local issues that we've heard a lot of you talk about. So that might be using downtown spaces to respond to COVID-19. That's something that's really prevalent right now. And so that we have that on there. We have an absentee property owners 101, a code enforcement. So a lot of areas that we've heard you all say this is an issue and we need a little bit of guidance. So please feel free to check those out. Again, upcoming trainings as well. We're hoping to provide more of those and some of those tangible toolkits that we can just host on our website. We also do bi-monthly regional phone calls. Again, those are not just open to your executive director or your board president or vice president. That's open to anyone who wants to join and share your thoughts and bounce ideas off each other. They've been really, really great just to hear what people are learning, what they're struggling in right now, and being able just to share ideas and encourage one another has been a really, really great opportunity. So we encourage you to keep an eye out for those. And then also we always have our Indiana Main Street Handbook, which is full of just helpful tips and tricks, things that you should be focusing on. If you ever feel like your organization's maybe drifting away from what really Main Street is, it's great just to go back to the handbook and do just a review as a board of it again. And so just know that it's always there as a resource for you. Okay, you can go to the next slide.
So I wanted to jump in and say that the Indiana Main Street program, now that you've heard us talking for a little bit, there are 2 program managers who oversee this program. And while your community liaison is going to be, like I said, your front door to government, and they should definitely be a close contact for you, we definitely want to make sure that you're familiar with us and who we are and what our roles are, and so that you know how we can assist you in your program. So I act as the coordinator of the program while Abby serves as the manager of outreach and organization. And this program hasn't always had 2 program managers, but the agency brought Abby on in January of 2020 because we really saw the need for additional capacity for the program. And because the Lieutenant Governor is such a strong supporter of the Main Street program and of our downtown communities, we were able to grow our team and therefore provide even more time and resources to communities who participate in the Indiana Main Street program. So we just wanted to spend a moment to kind of introduce ourselves, let you know what our roles are so that you know how we can best support you. My role as the coordinator is really to do just that, to coordinate activities between the National Main Street Center, OCRA, Indiana Main Street, and local programs, and try to align all of our initiatives. And so that could look like day-to-day coordinating various training opportunities, grant opportunities, or network opportunities. You can usually reach out to me for questions related to things with trainings or different announcements coming from Indiana Main Street, other things like annual reporting, which we'll talk about here in a bit, or if you're just looking to connect with National Main Street Center on something in particular, or really if you have any general questions or comments or concerns about your local Main Street program or Indiana Main Street or National Main Street, you can always reach out to me. Abby's role is a bit more specific, so I will pass it over to her to introduce herself and talk a bit about how she can be most helpful to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jackie. Yeah, so like Jackie said, I was brought on officially in January. And my role, again, it's new, and I think it was supposed to look a little bit different pre-COVID because really what hopefully once we get through this pandemic and we can be with each other again, a big part of my role is being out there in the communities and providing that capacity building, that skill building, some of those organizational pieces that are really, really vital to having a successful Main Street program. And so whether that's you need someone to come in and maybe do a fresh mission and vision planning or work plan development, or could use some support with advocacy. That's another huge part of my role that I'm excited about, whether that's us sitting down with your mayor or town leadership and just helping explain your value as a Main Street organization. I am completely available to do that. And really with that outreach piece, also providing good opportunities for promotional support at the state level for you all. So you might have taken part in our Small Business Saturday map. I led up that initiative, as well as community exchanges, and some other things as well. And obviously I support Jackie in a lot of her efforts. So overall, I'm really excited to get to continue to step more into my role, especially as we get through the pandemic. And I'm always available for any of those, again, capacity building or advocacy efforts and things like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I will have our contact information on the last slide. So if you ever need to get a hold of us, you can do so that way. But Abby did mention earlier that Indiana Main Street is a coordinating program of the National Main Street Center. And so we wanted to give you a little bit more background and context for what the national organization is and how we fit into it. So the National Main Street Center, it was established as a program originally of the National Trust for Historic Preservation back in 1980. And it was established as a way to address the myriad issues that are facing older and historic downtowns during that time. And so working with a nationwide network of coordinating programs and local communities, Main Street has helped over 2,000 communities across the country bring economic vitality back downtown, while also celebrating the historic character of downtowns and bringing communities together and bringing pride to communities. So an exciting new chapter for the organization began on July 1st, 2013, when the National Main Street Center launched as an independent subsidiary of the National Trust. This transition enabled Main Street to build on that 3-decade record of success with new leadership and new resources that have helped communities continue to respond to evolving needs and opportunities in the commercial district revitalization field. And then in 2015, the center launched a new program brand for the network of Main Street programs called Main Street America. And really that was to reinvigorate their collective look, feel, and strategy to position Main Street as a leader locally, regionally, and nationally. So you might hear us refer to the National Main Street Center as either that or Main Street America. And even folks who are at the National Main Street Center use the name interchangeably. So if that's ever confusing to you, just know more than likely we're all referring to the same thing. So the National Main Street Center is based in Chicago, Illinois, with an office in Washington, D.C., but they do have field staff located throughout the country. Today, it's a network of more than 1,600 neighborhoods and communities, both rural and urban, who share a commitment to place and to building stronger communities through preservation-based economic development. And fun fact, Madison, Indiana was actually one of 3 communities nationwide to participate as a pilot program when this was first created. So Madison is still a functioning Main Street program. They are nationally accredited. They're definitely one of the leaders within our state. And we're just really proud to have been part of the National Main Street Center's network from its inception. But then in 1985, legislation was passed to establish the Indiana Main Street program, and that's when we created this coordinating program within our state. And I believe that the Indiana Main Street program has been housed within OCRA since the early 2000s. So since we're talking a bit about the National Main Street Center, or Main Street America, we do want to highlight the fact that they have a variety of resources at your disposal. More than likely, your organization is a paying member to the National Main Street Center, and that membership gives you a lot of resources. And so we just wanted to take a moment to highlight a few. You can see here that these are all linked. They're hyperlinked. You can take some time to click through and explore what's at your disposal. But we want to first highlight their most recent resources. Main Street Forward. This is really looking at how local programs can think about what's next after COVID. How can we look toward economic recovery moving forward and ensure that we can bounce back from this crisis? The COVID-19 resources are more specific to dealing with the crisis in the moment of it. So there are a lot of different webinars, handbooks, guides, toolkits, you name it. Lots of different resources talking about how you as an organization, as a Main Street organization, can navigate this crisis. And then they also have a blog that I believe gets published weekly. And usually that's great because it gives you insight as to what other organizations are doing around the country. So it usually highlights some of the work being done with other programs, and it's a great way to learn best practices from others and what's worked well for other people. Abby already mentioned the Main Street Now conference, so I won't say too much about that. But I did want to also mention the Main Street America Institute. This is a great option for professional development if your organization budgets for it, which they should. It's all virtual, but there are specific courses and tracks you can take to specialize in certain areas like fundraising, as well as deep dives into the 4 points. There are a lot of different options there, and even if you are a paying member, it does have a cost attached to it, but it is pretty affordable. And you can, if you go through a certain track, you can end up with a professional certificate. And then the Main Street Resource Center, this is their resource center that was created. It's more of their permanent center pre-COVID. So there you'll find different handbooks on the 4 points, on more specific topics. So I just encourage you to explore that. Field services, you don't have to worry a lot about because as a coordinating program, we try to provide you trainings and direct services from the National Main Street Center, but they do have a field services team if you would like to reach out to them and coordinate something in addition to what we offer as a coordinating program. They also offer insurance. If your organization is looking for insurance options, we always point people there to start. And then last but not least, our favorite resource that Main Street America offers is called The Point. And really what The Point is, it's a discussion board where you're connected with everybody who's a part of this national network. If you ever are looking for an example of something, if you have a question about how others are approaching a situation that you're dealing with locally, you can hop on there, post your question, ask for an example of something, and people are so willing and generous that they'll share with you what's worked for them, what hasn't worked for them, and it can save a lot of time and effort to start from something rather than nothing. So we encourage you to hop on there and stay active, not only in asking questions, but also responding to other people, because that's really what this network is about. It's about relying on each other for best practices and learning opportunities. So these are just a list of resources that we want to make you aware of, and we hope that you take advantage of them. So as a coordinating program, we use Main Street America's 10 standards of performance to designate new Main Street programs and to evaluate currently designated Main Street programs. So these are the current standards of accreditation, but be aware that the National Main Street Center is currently working to revise these 10 standards into 6 new, more holistic standards. And those standards are expected to be released sometime in 2021, but then there will be a year for education to train everybody on the new standards, and I believe they're going to go into effect sometime by 2024. So don't fret, we will walk you through it, but just know some changes are coming with this. But for now, here are the standards that we at Indiana Main Street use as guidance for accreditation and evaluation. And you can go to the Main Street America website and they have more specific benchmarks and expectations under each of these 10 standards. But just to give you a high-level overview, here's what we're looking for. 1, that the organization has broad-based community support for the commercial district revitalization process with strong support from both the public and private sectors. 2, that they have a developed vision and mission statement relevant to community conditions and to the local Main Street program's organizational stage. 3, that they have a comprehensive Main Street work plan. 4, that they possess a historic preservation ethic. 5, that they have an active board of directors and committees. 6, that they have an adequate operating budget. 7, that they have a paid professional program manager. 8, that they conduct a program of ongoing training for staff and volunteers. 9, that they report key statistics. And 10 is a current member of the Main Street America network. So depending on the extent in which your organization meets these standards, you'll be designated into one of 3 levels. You can either be designated as a nationally accredited Main Street program, an Indiana accredited Main Street program, or a member of OCRA's downtown affiliate network. So hopefully you know the details of your own organization's level designation and what that means for your program. If you're unfamiliar with our levels system, we do have an entire webinar on the levels available on our website if you'd like to learn more about particular incentives, benchmarks, and requirements for each level.
Yeah, so kind of going off of that, within each level, there's as a coordinating program, we take the duty of obviously accrediting local programs and designating them. And so sorry, I got lost in my notes because Jackie hit a lot of the things that I was going to say, so that's perfect. So accreditation and evaluation to become and or more so keep your designation as either an ODAN, which is that OCRA's Downtown Affiliate Network, IAMS, which is the Indiana Accredited Main Street, or NAMS, which is Nationally Accredited Main Street, in our program requires the following. So I'm going to kind of break it down by level. That way, this is kind of summed up there on the slide, but if you're an ODAN community or your organization's in the ODAN level, you will, to continue to stay designated in that level, the basics that you need to hit is submitting your yearly annual reporting. It's an abbreviated annual reporting, and I'll hit on that more in a moment. But and then turning logo agreement and level agreement. There isn't any in-person evaluation or anything like that. When looking at the Indiana accredited Main Street, Jackie, am I still?
You're cutting out a little bit, so I didn't hear that last part.
If I'm cutting out too much, and I can pass it over to you.
I can hear you now.
Okay, good. So I'll just kind of quickly repeat myself just to make sure that it was on there. So if you're in the ODAN level, all you will need to do to stay designated in that level is to submit yearly annual reporting, as well as turning in your logo agreement and levels agreement each year. So I'll hit on the annual reporting specifically in a minute, but you won't have any in-person evaluation to stay in that designation. But if you're an Indiana accredited Main Street, you will have to do the above requirements. So you'll submit your annual reporting as well as the logo agreement and level agreement. But you will also have an in-person visit every 3 years from a community liaison. And it will not be your community liaison. It'll be one from a different community. Or different region, excuse me, that will then evaluate your program and see what areas of growth there might be and what resources are needed. And again, as Jackie said earlier, the standards that they will be evaluating you on are those levels requirements and the National Main Street Center standards. So it's good to get familiar with those and know what's expected. And then if you're a nationally accredited Main Street, all of the above applies, as well as you will get a yearly visit from Indiana Main Street staff for evaluation focused on, again, those standards of accreditation. You can go to the next slide. Okay, I mentioned annual reporting. That's really what creates this return on investment data. So again, I want to say that if you're an ODAN community, you only have to submit abbreviated annual reporting, which I know might be a relief just because. So that might hopefully is helpful. But if you are an IAMS or a NAMS community, you will still do the normal full-blown abbreviated or full-blown annual reporting. So that'll be through our GMS, grants management system, and Jackie will send information. But really, that return on investment of Main Street, not only at your local level, not only at the state level, but we also want to see it on the national level. How is the Main Street movement impacting our urban and rural communities? Man, I'm getting this bad network quality warning a lot. Hopefully I'm coming in okay, Jackie.
So far, so good.
Okay. So not only does this data show that reinvestment, but it also allows for National Main Street to build advocacy at the legislative level, which is big for potential future funding that we can offer you and things like that. So that is a huge deal. But it also helps your organization tell your story of impact to your stakeholders. And as board members, this should be one of the most important things that you're thinking about. How do we tell people in the community, especially those who want to be financially invested, how do we tell them that we're making a difference with what we're doing? And this data, if you're collecting it accurately and consistently, can really do that. Well, a couple words of advice for collecting this data. Make sure that you're collecting it throughout the year. Like I said, do it consistently instead of trying to gather it right before the deadline. Odds are you'll have better, more consistent, clear data when you're doing it that way. And also, it doesn't put all the pressure on whoever's collecting it to get it all done in a rush. Also, a little side note, remember that this is not all on your paid staff to do. If you do have an executive director, it's not just on your board president. Really, it should be split up amongst the whole board or maybe even some committee members. Just make sure that you're all taking a part in collecting that data and not putting it on one person. So make sure that's a part of your yearly work plan. And then mechanism that works well for your organization. So some people just use Excel and that works for them and they know how to do it and they know how to get people on the document working on it. But also you might look into doing something like, I know Maestro is a Main Street specific kind of online platform that allows you to not only track data, but also track your work plan and things like that. And then there's also a couple other ones. So if you're ever interested in getting more information on those, feel free to reach out to Jackie or I, and we can connect you to some different resources. I'm getting some, oh, there we go. Okay, sorry, my screen's a little laggy. Okay, so speaking of that ROI data, every year we compile the data you send in and we kind of create a state infographic to kind of help show the impact of Main Street in the state of Indiana. So this is our example from 2019. Am I coming in? Can you hear me, Jackie?
Yep, you cut out for a minute, but I can hear you now.
Okay, sorry everyone. I don't know why I'm having so many issues. But yeah, so this is our 2019 data. And how many jobs were created and how much was like the total investment for a program to create some kind of or out to your utilize that. So you can go to the next slide. So overall, really just the takeaways from that is, you know, I think these two quotes really summarize why we do what we do with Main Street and why we invest so much time and work into it. This idea of like the place is becoming more important than the product. So people really are starting to care about their places where they walk and shop and live. And Main Street is such a big game changer in that. And it's a huge one. So we're really passionate about that. And also we're switching the idea of what we knew about economic development. And now we're realizing that economic development really is the result of creating places where people want to be. It's not just the smokestacks or getting huge corporations to move into your communities, but it's really that downtown core, bringing people there who want to live, not to sound repetitive, but live, work, and play there, you know, and really make that their home. So that's important to us.
Definitely. And thanks, Abby. Yeah, I love those two quotes because I really do think it just drives home what we're trying to do here with Main Street. which is a good segue to kind of our next topic, which is looking at the Main Street approach. So hopefully you're familiar with this approach, especially if you're a board member who served on a committee before. This is probably familiar to you, but we couldn't do an orientation without talking about it. So the Main Street America network, they really provide the framework that we use in this program, which is at the heart of all local Main Street activities. So that's the Main Street approach. And really at the heart of it, it offers community-based revitalization initiatives with a practical, adaptable framework for downtown transformation that can be easily tailored to local conditions. So this is not a one-size-fits-all framework. It is meant to be interpreted based on your local conditions, your local capacity, and your local needs. But it all begins with creating a vision for success that's rooted in a solid understanding of the market realities of the district and is informed by broad community engagement. So you might be joining a local program who has already gone through a transformation strategy process, and that's great. If you have a leg up, you have this strategy already identified, and we hope that it's guiding your work plan and the activities of your organization. If you're joining a local program who has not been through that process yet, we're hoping to continue working with communities to go through the transformation strategy process throughout 2021. But you can also find other ways to identify what your strategy should be that guides all of the work you do. You can find a lot of resources on that on the Main Street America website. In fact, I can't recall the name of it right now, but they have an entire handbook on how to select a strategy and to have more of that strategy-driven approach. So I sometimes find it easier to explain what the Main Street program is by providing counterexamples. So I listed a few common misconceptions about the Main Street program here. Main Street programs are not just party planners. We find a lot of the times that local programs get in the habit of being the event planners for the community. And while events do play a major role within promotions and they have a time and place and an impact, we definitely want to encourage people to think beyond that. Main Street programs are really intended to be economic development organizations. And when you work the Main Street approach holistically, you can really do a lot more than plan parties or do events. The Main Street program, we also like to say, is not a grant program. It's intended to be a long-term, community-driven volunteer program that's looking more toward incremental, slow, sustainable change in the community. There are some times where we see communities organize a Main Street program so that they can be eligible to apply for a grant. And we just want to emphasize that that's not what this program is about. Even though there are grants associated with Main Streets, it's really more the cherry on top of this program. At the heart of it, it's meant to be community-driven and people-driven. And then lastly, Main Street programs are not the same as an EDC or a chamber or any other kind of economic group. There really is room for all to work together collaboratively. And when we kind of walk through this Main Street approach in a little bit more detail, I think you'll see how much more Main Street does beyond just what some of these other organizations do. So we just like to make sure that folks know this is not intended to repeat the efforts of others within the community. It's meant to fill gaps and support the work that others are doing already. So here's an overview of the 4-point approach, which is now usually referred to as the Main Street approach. And I love this visual representation of that framework. It shows you what the 4 points are and how they kind of all work together to create community transformation. So work plans at the local level are typically arranged around these 4 points, with volunteer committees actually executing the work. But looking at the 4 points, economic vitality, it's really about building a diverse economic base, about catalyzing smart new investment, and cultivating a strong entrepreneurship ecosystem. Design is really about creating an inviting, inclusive atmosphere, celebrating historic character, fostering accessible, people-centered public spaces. And then with promotion, It's really looking at the market district's defining assets, communicating unique features through storytelling, and supporting that buy local experience. And then lastly, with organization, it's looking at how to build leadership and strong organizational capacity. How can we ensure broad community engagement? And how can we forge partnerships across sectors? So we'll take a little bit of a deeper dive into each of these 4 points, but again, I love this visual because it shows you how they all work together. So I'll kick it off with design. And, design really supports a community's transformation by enhancing the physical and visual assets that set the commercial district apart. So there are really 2 purposes here with design. The first is to guide and implement physical changes in the Main Street district that make it physically attractive to shoppers, investors, business owners, visitors, and I don't have it on here, but people who live in the downtown. More and more, we're seeing people who want to live downtown, and we want to encourage that behavior. But then the second purpose is to protect historic properties and encourage and celebrate new development downtown. So with each point, we'll just give you a high-level overview and then provide some sample projects that you might find on your design work plan. So here are a variety of examples that you could take on or your design committee could take on, I should say. But really, the design committee's work can range from things like flower potting during the spring, to enhancing benches in the downtown, to offering a local facade loan program, maybe offering design consultations, services, or trainings. A lot of times we see placemaking efforts being led by the design committee. But these are just some general ideas for you if you're having a hard time thinking about what does design look like day to day, what do those specific activities look like. We also see a lot of streetscape initiatives for some of our higher functioning, larger capacity programs as well. So hopefully this gives you an idea of what design is really focusing on.
Yeah. Sorry, everyone, that I had to turn off my video, but it helps with the bandwidth issues. So hopefully you got to see my face for a little bit before I had to turn off my video. But so yeah, organization, I'm a little biased to this point because number one, it is in the name of my role here at Indiana Main Street. But I really do believe that organization is probably the most important of the 4 points, mostly because it really guides the way for the 3 other points to succeed to their fullest capability. So it's really key for a sustainable Main Street revitalization effort to have that strong organizational foundation, because organization focuses on things like having strong partnerships, fundraising strategies, funding plans, sustainability, strong volunteer recruitment, and more. And really, I emphasize this one to you as board members because really, I mean, you're looking at a lot of things, but you're really honing in on organization, especially those of you on your executive board. You are really looking at those logistical pieces, or if you're on the organization committee, this is really important for you. So you can go to the next slide, Jackie. So this is a typical organizational structure, and we really show you this just so you all can see, hey, here's how I would say majority of our Main Street programs, this is how they kind of function. Obviously, this might look different for you. Maybe you don't have an executive director or paid staff. Maybe you're even like housed underneath another entity, whether that's the town or maybe even a chamber, things like that. So this might look a little different for you, but overall, I mean, still you're functioning, you should be functioning anyways in the sense of having those organizational stakeholders. So those are people typically who are giving to you financially, they're defining some needs, they're investing in what you're doing, things like that. And then you obviously have you all as the board of directors. And so you're really looking at things like the financial management of the organization. You're advocating for the organization. You're looking at policies and planning and personnel. And then if you do have that executive director and staff, they answer to you all. They're looking at the overall facilitation, the implementation, coordinating efforts, and then communicating to you all as well. And then underneath that person, you have those typically 4 committees. The 4 committees do not have to be broken out into like the 4 points. Typically, that's how organizations like to do it just because it makes sense. But we find that sometimes the committees start to get siloed and they don't work together when in reality, a lot of the 4 points overlap one another. And so don't forget, sometimes like you can change things up. You can have a specific committee working on fundraising and you'd still be working towards organization. So know that there's freedom to change that up. And typically Main Streets are a 501c3 nonprofit, but again, we know there are some exceptions where you might be something different because of your overall, the entity that is over you or something like that. So yeah, next slide. So here are some examples of what might be on your organization work plan. I think I hear from people a lot that this is something they struggle with. You know, what should they have on their work plan for their organization committee? And really, again, it can be any of the things I kind of already mentioned, but these are some more specific things. So you might be representing the Main Street program at the local, state, or even national levels. So you might be going out and advocating, going to different conferences or events. You also might be developing and maintaining systems to track the progress of the Main Street organization. This is really important, whether that's even financially tracking things. Obviously, you have a treasurer, things like that, but also just looking at overall the work plan. What are we getting done every year? How's the sustainability? How much money are we putting away? All these things that as the board you should be looking at. A big one is the comprehensive fundraising plan. This is something we're going to be honing in on more at the coordinating level and encouraging our local programs to have this in place. And really, if you do have a paid staff, this should not just be on the paid staff. The board should really be planning and implementing the comprehensive fundraising plan. And there might be pieces to do for the executive director, but really you guys are leading the charge in that. And you have connections throughout the community to help hopefully get that rolling. So you also might be conducting an orientation and placement for volunteers, participating in staff performance evaluations, working with City Hall, making sure your partnership with the town is strong. So the list can kind of go on. And I know that organization is not always the most sexy of the 4 points, to be honest. It's a little bit more mundane. Sometimes it seems a little bit more logistical, but if that's what you're good at, and if you're on the board as someone who has a lot of experience with fundraising or with volunteer recruitment, I mean, use those skills, be a part of that committee, and really help your organization be sustainable for long term. Okay, so looking at promotion, promotion is probably one of the most popular points. You know, if we're looking at the opposite of organization, you have promotion, which is typically very loved by many of our Main Streets, and it's understandable. Promotion is usually really fun. It involves events, and it involves getting to create some community opportunities to be all together. And so, which is great, but we do want to make sure that we really emphasize that promotion is more than just planning your events. And at times we've noticed that some of our local programs are pretty event heavy. They struggle to get other things in the other 3 points done because they have so many events on their docket every year. And so this is something that hopefully we can talk about promotion kind of in a different lens and think about more of marketing the district's unique characteristics, whether that's to local shoppers, to investors, to new businesses or entrepreneurs. Really, if you have an effective promotion strategy, it will forge this positive image, whether that's through your advertising, through your retail promotional activity, special events, and marketing campaigns. So we really want to help people see that promotion is not just having those events, but also really telling your story through your marketing strategy, whether that's through social media, and just overall like helping serve to improve consumer and investor confidence in the districts and creating that community pride, and that community, again, story of this is who we are, and telling that story. So you can go to the next slide, Jackie. Some potential projects that might be on your promotion committee work plan is some of those things I kind of, again, already hit on. So that might be developing a new Main Street logo. Maybe you've been a program for a long time. People are starting to kind of maybe not exactly know who you are, and you just want to do a brand refresh. Well, the promotions committee should really be taking charge of that, and they should be looking at opportunities to get to kind of maybe redo your website or a logo or do a whole new branding campaign, things like that. They also might be creating a downtown business directory, and this might be in work with your economic vitality committee. You know, they can work to help promote your downtown businesses. They obviously, there's a lot of event opportunities, but also make sure that your events are not just that they're working within the other 4 points. So it might be co-sponsoring a historic tour with the Historical Society. That's a great way to forge a partnership, as well as market your downtown and talk about design. So that's kind of hitting a lot of different areas when you're doing that. So obviously you can look at this list more, but just remember that promotion is also really focusing on your marketing. And if you feel like you've gotten a little bit event heavy, maybe think about this next year, adjusting your work plan and saying, how can we do more marketing initiatives and telling our story? And that might be through a couple events, but it also might be taking a couple events off the docket and kind of maybe putting some of your capacity elsewhere.
Yeah, and then, the final point here, economic vitality, like Abby alluded to, so many of these can overlap with one another. And, to her point about we don't want anything to live in a silo, a lot of these do have overlap, and we hope that you're seeing some of those connections. But in terms of economic vitality specifically, this is really focusing on capital, incentives, and other economic and financial tools to assist new and existing businesses, and to also catalyze property development and create a supportive environment for entrepreneurs and innovators that drive local economies. So we're really trying to strengthen the existing economic assets and diversify the economic base. So we're looking at expanding and recruiting businesses, really in order to respond to the market. And I think especially post COVID-19, we're really going to see this emphasis on economic vitality, because unfortunately, we've seen so many small businesses close across the country. So it's thinking about, how can we help to convert unused or underutilized space, make it more economically productive? How can we cultivate that entrepreneurial spirit and culture? So a lot of times economic vitality committees work to create and maintain an entrepreneurial network. They also work to attract entrepreneurs to the Main Street District. They also grow entrepreneurial ventures. So trying to be that downtown business center and trying to facilitate access to existing human and financial capital. So the Economic Vitality Committee could really work on projects ranging from maintaining a downtown building inventory, recruiting new businesses to the downtown, establishing financial incentive programs to support entrepreneurs or to stimulate investments in the downtown. They might coordinate a network among small business owners. A lot of times we see happy hours happening within Main Street districts to try to connect small business owners with one another. We also see a lot of Main Street programs providing education and training, maybe partnering with a local college or another organization like the Small Business Administration or something similar to provide some training to local business owners. So yeah, here are just a variety of examples that you might see. Again, with any of these points and the examples that we've provided, they should really be selected based on your unique strategy and the current conditions of your downtown. But these are hopefully just some good suggestions. For me, I always learn through examples, and so that's really the idea here, is to help you better understand what these 4 points are trying to get at by providing some concrete examples of activities that might be on your work plan. But we're going to pivot a little bit from the Main Street approach and talk a bit more about what it actually means to be a board member and what it looks like day to day. So I'm going to throw it back over to Abby to kick us off with this.
Yeah, so just like Jackie said, we want to talk about what it means to be a board at work. And that also means that you are a part of a working board when you're a part of a Main Street board. And I know that most people, I think, recognize that, but we emphasize that only because I think sometimes, we've heard from, many programs, not just in our state, that, sometimes boards can just show up and maybe they're not putting in the time that really is needed to make Main Street the most that it can be. And so that's kind of why we emphasize that work title. But really, I mean, looking at these two descriptions here, the board of directors assumes legal and philosophical responsibility for the Main Street organization's activities. It must educate, build consensus, stimulate action in the commercial district, and involve volunteers in the revitalization process. So that's kind of a good summary, those bolded words. Think about that, maybe reflect a little bit. Is that what we're doing right now? Are we hitting all of those areas? It's a good way to just kind of do some self-reflection. And then also, as the direction of the program evolves and creates new opportunities, the board's role in each of these areas, it may change. It may look different. It may increase, in some areas and decrease in others. And so I think there are, however, certain basic responsibilities that do remain constant throughout the life of the organization. So we're going to talk about those a little bit. So really the general expectations for boards at work is kind of the following. So the board is ultimately responsible and accountable for the Main Street organization. At the end of the day, this is really, it comes back on the board, even if you do have a paid staff or things like that. You're really helping lead the organization even through challenges. They should be delegating, and they can delegate daily management to the executive director or the committees, but they cannot delegate review of the program's budget and plans or the monitoring and evaluation of the program's effectiveness. So really, that's just saying that those two pieces really do fall on the board, and you don't want to throw those all onto an executive director or paid staff, because honestly, that's just too much for one person to handle, and you need the whole board working towards those things. They should also, Main Street boards are both governing boards and working boards. So you are, you're voting on things, things like that, but you're also doing work to implement the Main Street 4-point approach and your overall mission and vision. Main Street boards deal with the present and the future. I think this is a big one to emphasize, just because, yes, you're dealing with what's going on right now, how you're even combating with COVID and all these things, but you're also thinking about the sustainability of the organization. Where's the organization going to be in 2 years and 5 years and 10 years? And even though you're not going to maybe be on the board then, what you're doing now impacts that. And so you're always thinking of both the present and the future. Main Street is volunteer driven and not staff driven. So I think that's a good thing for boards to be reminded of sometimes. I know it's easy when you have that paid staff person, because I know all of you are volunteers, you have other jobs, you have families, but it is important that you remember that when you decided to be on this board, that it is volunteer driven, and it's expected that everyone's doing their equal part so that nobody's overwhelmed or doing it all by themselves. And the board has sole responsibility to raise the money, not the staff. And I kind of already emphasized this earlier, that fundraising should not only be on the paid staff or just not on the board president, even if you don't have paid staff. It should be everyone working together on that overall fundraising goal. So not only those pieces, but the board should be kind of focusing on these kind of 3 bolded ideas here. So the why, being an advocate, and then fostering that community acceptance and involvement. So the board must always represent the larger view of why commercial revitalization is crucial for the entire community. So you're going out and you're telling people this why. You have your elevator speech ready to tell the story of Main Street and to tell the story of why this is vital for your community to be able to grow and be sustainable long term. It also, as board, you are serving as an advocate always for the Main Street orgs and ensuring that that community has a comprehensive understanding. So I kind of already hit on that too, but you're always being an advocate. And that doesn't mean that you don't ever disagree internally with what's going on. Maybe you have some thoughts, you want to do something a little different. That's okay. There can be conversation, come to a consensus. But overall, you should always be positively advocating, because you care about what the Main Street's doing as well as your community. And then you're also responsible for fostering that community acceptance of the Main Street and the involvement in the process as well. And that will be through those public and private partnerships. So you're really, creating those partnerships as well as positive and good partnerships with the town, with donors, with stakeholders. That will really help foster that community acceptance of Main Street and the overall involvement. You'll get more volunteers, things like that.
Yes. So, with all of that in mind, like Abby said, something we always try to emphasize is that being a board member for Main Street, it's not an easy task. It's not something you just show up for once a month, you show up for a meeting and then you go home. Main Street boards are working boards with real responsibilities. So here are 10 common responsibilities of Main Street boards that might be useful for you to consider. So it's your responsibility as a board member to determine the mission and the vision, and to not just do it once, but to consistently and regularly check back in on it, evaluate it, decide if it still makes sense or not. It's your responsibility to hire the manager or the executive director when funding allows. It's your responsibility to develop the budget and establish financial controls, and to raise and manage the money as well, like Abby said. It's also your responsibility to understand all of the legal duties of a nonprofit corporation, if your organization is a nonprofit corporation. It's your responsibility to plan for the future and evaluate the present, to recommend names and orient new board members. So that might be creating some additional supplemental material to what we're providing to you for you today. A lot of organizations have new board member handbooks, things like that, that your organization committee could put together. It's also the responsibility of a board to advocate for the local program, to monitor and grow the organization's programs, and to support the executive director if you have one, and to also evaluate them regularly. So the board together is responsible generally for the following aspects: policy, funding and financial management, personnel, committee oversight, planning and doing, and monitoring, evaluating, and communicating the values. So these are just some of those general broad things that we really want you to take away with you from today's training. And directing an organization, again, it's a really big responsibility. And at the end of the day, it is the responsibility of the board, not the staff, to maintain these responsibilities. So things like establishing and continuing the legal existence of the program, that falls on the board, not paid staff. Ensuring that the program fulfills legal requirements and the conduct of its business and affairs, that's on the board. Determining the program's purposes, the governing principles, functions and activities, and course of action. These are really foundational elements of your organization, and they are critical. Like Abby said, maybe not the most sexy thing, but they are necessary for sustainability. And so that also falls under the responsibility of a board member. And then, of course, as a board member, you're assuming responsibility for internal policies that are governing the program.
Yeah, so, some more pieces of that logistical, what does it mean to actually be a board member? So first of all, expect to work at least 4 to 10 hours a month. It's really going to depend on the month, how much you have going on, how well you honestly have things delegated across the boards and committees. I will say that I think you'll probably work less hours probably overall if you have things evenly delegated out between all of you. That makes a big difference, and it can help kind of lessen the load on 1 or 2 people that are trying to carry everything. But you're a working board. So if for some reason you're not interested or not able to put in the time for that, then you might just have to think about, is this the board for me? And that's really good too, as you think about bringing on new board members. Be mindful of helping it be realistic to them. Hey, this is the amount of time. Obviously you don't want to scare them away, but you want to be realistic so they know what they're signing up for and wanting to be a part of. You also should be not only attending, but contributing to every board meeting. Also, just a side note, it's good to have an attendance policy if you don't. I know sometimes we've heard that from our local programs that, people kind of sometimes just stop coming consistently and maybe don't do a good job at giving a heads up that they're not coming. But really, there should be an attendance policy in place. You should only be able to miss so many meetings. Obviously, emergencies come up, there's flexibility, but that's why you have policies in place like that. But then also make sure that you're contributing. So guide and monitor the work of the organization, understand what's going on so that if someone asked you just randomly, oh, hey, what's been going on with Main Street? You'd be able to give a good idea of what actually is going on. You're reinforcing that it's shared purpose. You're informing and inspiring other board members. I think that's an important one. You're addressing and resolving conflict. This can be a hard one sometimes with boards, but it's so important because you'll be a healthier organization if you can know how to work through some conflict. You're encouraging dialogue on significant issues and strategic directions, and you're coordinating people and activities, specifically, I think, a lot in the committees. And then you're also developing board policies, so relating to the governance of the organization, not day-to-day operations necessarily. So just making sure that you, I think we talk about this a little bit more somewhere else, but I mean, you should have really your bylaws and how each meeting should go. All of that should be developed and updated over time and things like that. You're developing those operations policies. So again, that more relates to that day-to-day operations. You need to know, especially if you have a paid staff person, make sure you have those in place. You don't want to hire someone on and not have some good day-to-day operation and employment policies in place. You should also be managing your annual operating budget. You're ensuring that the organization runs at its peak efficiency. And you should be translating those annual goals into financial data by projecting revenues and expenditures for reach, activity, and tasks. So this is a big deal just because I think sometimes boards, they'll kind of give a quick, the treasurer will give a quick update, but really it should be a little bit more in depth than that. And at least every once in a while, maybe the treasurer should be giving, or a couple people, if you have like a financial committee type thing, should be giving a more in-depth, okay, here's where we're at, here's where we want to be, here's some different data with that. It's always good to have that because you will be a more sustainable organization down the road if you have that in place. You also, I know we've emphasized this a lot, but you're also fundraising. So you're developing that long-term and fundraising sustainability plan. And so remember that if you need support figuring out what that even looks like, reach out to us. We would love to help you in that. You also want to be supporting all of the fundraising activities of the organization. So that means if you're having a fundraising dinner, I mean, all of you should be at it. I mean, obviously, again, exceptions, things happen, but like really, you all should be a part of that process. If you know a potential stakeholder, go out and ask them to lunch, go be a part of it. Make sure you're knocking on doors and asking people to support. And then all board members should make a financial contribution to the extent that they are able. Obviously, we want a diverse group of board members. You want people, and some people aren't going to be able to give, a certain X amount of dollars, but just ask them to donate anything that they can, because that really shows that you really care and you're putting in your stake too. So you also should be developing those personnel policies and supporting your executive director. That's a really important one. It's one that sometimes I think organizations get so excited just to have an executive director that they forget to make sure that some of these things are in place, like even how they're going to support that director. Is the president and the vice president going to have a, maybe a bi-weekly or a monthly meeting, or are you going to do a 90-day check-in? All of these pieces are really important when you're thinking about hiring on full-time or even part-time staff.
Yeah, and so to just kind of summarize in very concrete terms, here are some of those tasks you might be expected to take charge of. And while board tasks will differ from program to program depending on the community and the organization's stage in the life cycle, these are just some of your typical run-of-the-mill Main Street board tasks. So adopting the yearly work plan, adopting the yearly budget, reviewing and approving monthly financials, hiring, rewarding, or terminating an executive director, establishing a chain of command, reviewing any IRS forms before filing, setting policies and updates as needed, reviewing those mission and vision statements regularly, creating and following long-term plans, understanding risk management, planning an orderly succession process. That one in particular is an item that we often see overlooked. And you got to keep in mind, you're not going to be part of this organization forever. So let's think about a succession plan. Also assisting in friend raising, which is a form of fundraising, really where you take the donor by the hand, you welcome them on board, thank them more than once, show them the sites, and really make them feel valued. I think a big part of being a board member when it comes to fundraising is relationship building. So you're going to definitely assist in things like that. And above all, you're going to become a walking, talking advocate for downtown. Like Abby said, it's about promoting that image of positivity, and positivity is contagious. So you definitely want to promote that feeling. And then becoming a board member for a local Main Street program means that you're making a commitment not only to that organization, but also to your community. So what does that commitment look like? You should be willing to serve on one committee. You should be willing to attend as many board meetings as possible. And if you can't be there physically, do what you can to call into the meeting. Obviously, right now with COVID, a lot of us are meeting virtually, and that's okay too. But you definitely want to prioritize your attendance. You also want to attend and support most events and third-party events that are taking place in the downtown. You want the community and the public to see that you're there, and again, to just kind of glean some of that positivity from you and how you speak about and represent the Main Street program. You also want to be committed to financially supporting the organization. Like Abby said, it doesn't have to be a certain amount of money. We don't want to exclude anybody from being on the board, but to whatever extent is possible, you want to financially support the organization and really put your money where your mouth is. You want to represent board positions without bias, and this can sometimes cause a lot of conflict internally. And so make sure you're thinking through any ethics or anything you need to bring to the board and to the table where you might have a potential bias, and have a process in place for how to address conflict of interest. But even if you disagree with something, if the board as a whole has agreed to take a stance on something or to move forward in a certain way, you know, majority rules, minority rights. But if the majority of the board has agreed to take a stance, you have to be okay with committing yourself to whatever that stance is without bias. A unified voice is so important for a board to have. And so, of course, we all bring different perspectives to the table, but at the end of the day, it's so critical to stay unified. And that kind of leads into this last point is, as a board member, you're committed to not talking to the press without talking to the board first about what that unified message is going to be. Typically, we recommend having one point person within the board be the person who would talk to the press, just to make sure that there's consistent language and communication happening. Typically, that's the role of the board president, but you know, you just want to make sure that you're committed to sharing a unified message within the community, because if it looks like there's disruption or conflict internally, that's going to look bad for the organization. So these are just some things that as a board member, you're committing yourself to, again, not only for the organization, but for the community as a whole. So just some other board tasks to keep in mind. You're going to be expected to attend any Indiana Main Street and other relevant trainings. A lot of times what we see is the executive director there, but no board members. Trainings are for the entire organization, so it's really important that you as a board member, to the extent possible, attend Indiana Main Street trainings or any trainings we offer from the National Main Street Center. Another task would be going to the National Main Street Conference and making sure that as a board you're budgeting at the beginning of the year or whenever you do your budget, so that you can be able to go in addition to any paid staff. You also want to network with merchants and property owners. Connections and that relationship building piece is so important when it comes to being a board member. And with that in mind, you also just want to visit with your merchants downtown. Check in on them, make sure they know that you're there. Having a presence in the community is such an important part of being a board member. And yes, it's true for paid staff as well, but it's also as important for any board member. And then present at city council meetings. Similar in thought, you want to make sure that the public, whether that's the merchants, residents, the city council, the mayor, you want to make sure people know that you are present. And so the best way to do that is to present to this group regularly and tell them all the things that you've been able to do as an organization. Make sure they understand who you are, what you do, and how they can continue to support you moving forward, or if they don't support you yet, how they might be able to do so. And if you're going to ask for financial support, make sure you also tell them how you're going to use that financial support. Have a plan and say, with this amount of money, we could accomplish X, Y, Z. That's going to be a much stronger message than just asking for support without knowing exactly what that might look like. And we've mentioned fundraising a couple times, but I did want to take a moment to just do a little bit of a deeper discussion around fundraising. So it is really important for your organization to have a fundraising plan, not only for the current year, but really one that's looking long term, at least 3 years out, but ideally maybe 3 to 5 years out or longer. Often what we see is the misconception that the executive director should oversee fundraising, and that's not true. Fundraising, again, I know we've said it and we probably sound like a broken record, but fundraising is one of the primary responsibilities of the board. And so the board, you can work toward fundraising as you're working on some of these things here. So developing the annual budget, making those individual donations, assuring that there's adequate money to operate, monitoring the program finances monthly. You always want to make sure you have a pulse on what's going on. Approving expenditures through work plan process, and developing long-term funding strategies. So really, the role of the board when it comes to fundraising is to monitor the financial condition of the organization and to support all fundraising activities of the organization. Board commitment forms are highly encouraged. If you don't have those, it's something to consider. And then looking at kind of how other roles within Main Street fit into fundraising, the organization committee can really help by assisting the board in soliciting public funds, implementing investor campaigns and annual appeals, producing fundraising events and product sales, or generating other fundraising activities as assigned by the board. So some of this can be delegated to your committees, but just know that the responsibility is held at the board level. Similarly, there is a role for staff when it comes to fundraising, but it may not be what you think it is. So just for clarification, the staff is not responsible for fundraising, but they can act as the coordinator. The staff could do grant writing and grant management, for example. They might maintain the sponsorship list. They might maintain a grant list. The staff might be the ones working with the committees to develop fundraising support materials. The staff might serve as the public relations ambassador. They might be the ones ensuring that the fundraising work plan is actually implemented. They might be the ones assisting in the development of an investor campaign and those other fundraising materials. And really, their role is to support the organization committee and the board in fundraising efforts without holding the entire responsibility. So they're tracking contributions, they're doing the record keeping and that kind of thing when it comes to fundraising.
Yeah, so really now we're just going to look at how do I be a better Main Street board member? And I think these things are just helpful, again, when we're thinking about that self-reflection. How can I be better? How can we be a better board? These are some really great places to start. So first of all, read and know your bylaws. I think if you're maybe you're new to the board and that wasn't something that was required, I would encourage you to make that a requirement of any new board member to read those bylaws. But also, if you just need a refresher, refresh yourself, or maybe take a board meeting to refresh yourself. That's not a bad idea. because there might be some things that were decided in those that maybe you want to change around a little bit or adjust, and that needs to be decided obviously by the board. So just read and know those. Also understand your policies and procedures at the organizational level. Again, this is similar to bylaws where board members should know these as well as staff. And so if they need updated, take time to look over them. Make sure you kind of have everything in place. And if you ever need, reach out to other Main Street organizations. If you're like, we need a more clear idea of different kinds of personnel policies or procedures we should have. Also be familiar with having a strategic plan. Obviously, we encourage you to have a very comprehensive work plan, but I think it's also good to overall have a strategy and a plan that fits within that, and that will help you be more focused on what you decide to do. You only have so much capacity, especially if you're an all-volunteer organization. And so having a strategy will help you say, that's a really cool idea, but that doesn't really fall within our strategy at that point. So let's put that on the waiting table and come back to that maybe in a year or whenever. Also memorize your mission statement. I think this is really important as you're doing that advocacy and you're out in the community. Be ready to spit that off to someone, because that will get, I think, people more invested in understanding of, oh, okay, that's what you do. And that's a little bit about you. So it's good to have that ready. And also, I think Jackie hit on this a little bit earlier, but avoid that conflict of interest. So understand what it is, and conflicts are inevitable. We are going to have things that happen sometimes in our organizations, but know that, and also know, just like she hit on biases earlier, know what you might have a bias towards or where it might not be appropriate for you to even make a voting decision, things like that, and just be honest about it. Transparency is one of the best things we can do in organizations. So just be aware of that. You should also know and understand the organization's budget, the work plans, goals, and objectives. This is a big one where if you do have paid staff, the paid staff might help implement the work plan, goals, and objectives, but you should have been a part of helping create that, as well as you should know what that is. You should understand the financial statements, the IRS 990 tax returns, audits, what the chain of command is. I think this is something we see a lot of issues with. There isn't a lot of clarity about who's supposed to answer to who and all of those things. So just make sure that's clear and that you all understand that. And individual board members should really make sure they're participating in the program with their time. Obviously, we said that 4 to 10 hours, and that might be allocated in different ways, but just make sure it's a part of your, your time and your knowledge. So use your professional experience. You're on that board for a reason. Someone reached out to you or you decided to join for a reason. You have knowledge to share, so share that. Money or access to money. So whether that's, obviously you might give to the organization consistently because you care about it, but you also might have access to some other people who would be great donors or people who can provide the organization with some financial support. You also should be attending those educational and training opportunities and programs, like Jackie said, and ask questions. If you don't understand something or you feel, not only you can ask your executive director if you do have paid staff, but also feel free to reach out to your community liaison or Jackie or I. If there's something you just want to know more about, you don't have to be the board president to do that. Anyone can reach out to us and we want to be of a help. But obviously, if you can always ask your leadership first, they might know the answer too.
Yeah, so while the board should really work together to guide the organization, the board president is really the leader of the organization, kind of like Abby was saying. And so we just wanted to take a moment to talk about what the role of the board president would look like, because that role does come with some unique responsibilities. So if you're the board president, or if you're considering to become one someday, just know that you're the official representative of the organization. You're the CEO, you're the check signer, and sometimes you're also going to be the spokesperson. If you have an executive director, you are their supervisor, at least their direct supervisor. You're going to chair board meetings and set the agenda with the executive director for every meeting. That should not be on the executive director alone. you're the chair of the board meetings. If you're the board president, you're really the one who's looked to solve problems between board and staff, or between board and board and committee chairs, any kind of interpersonal relationship issues. Your role is to really help mitigate that. The role of the board president is also to forge consensus, to delegate responsibilities, to appoint committee chairs, or sometimes to call special meetings of the board. If something has come up and you need to meet immediately, you are the one to call that special meeting. The role of the board president should really lead by example and encourage everyone on the board to attend trainings, and also work with the staff to solve problems. We'll talk about this here in a moment, but if your executive director, if you have one, comes to you as the board president, just remember that you are their direct supervisor, and it's really your job to help them mitigate any problems that they may be having. So although the board is a critical role when it comes to Main Street and a local program's effectiveness, we also want to recognize that there are other roles within the organization. And so we wanted to highlight what these roles should generally look like to help clarify the board's role from other roles. So some of the roles we'll touch on here include the executive director, the committees, the volunteers, the municipality, and the business owners.
Yeah, so like Jackie said, I think it's important to know the difference between maybe what your role is, and then if you have an executive director or paid staff, and what is expected of that paid staff. And so I made a little note to say, you know, we do often see sometimes boards not even meaning to. Again, they think they just get excited that they have a paid staff person, and that is great. That is going to increase your capacity in amazing ways, but sometimes it turns into the board accidentally maybe overworking them, passing on some of their duties to the executive director, and then they get burnt out. And we don't want that, you know, and I know you guys don't want that either. So the executive director really, you know, they are looking at that support. So supporting those preservation-based economic development in collaboration with you all. So they're sharing what they're learning, what they want to implement, those overall coordinating efforts, things like that. They're also managing. So they're going to probably be managing some administrative aspects of the day-to-day work, which is great. Again, having that person, that paid person to do that. They're not necessarily an administrative assistant. You might be able to eventually hire someone who's kind of focused on that administrative piece, but the executive director can definitely do some pieces of that. They're also developing and conducting ongoing public awareness and educational programs. That's definitely something that we encourage our executive directors to be doing, as well as, you know, their own education and working on that through our trainings or National Main Street, things like that. They're also assessing and developing the capacity of the business district, institutions, and groups to carry out joint improvement activities. So really, they're just always kind of assessing what's going on in the downtown corridor, and finding ways to really improve your overall impact. And they're assisting individual tenants or property owners with projects that they're working on, or maybe some issues. Usually the executive director kind of becomes the sounding board of some maybe business owners that might be a little bit disgruntled and things like that. So hopefully they're communicating that to you all too, so you guys can figure out how to support those business owners. They also are helping to build strong, productive working relationships among partners. So where you guys might be overall building those partners, the executive director can support you in that by actually kind of doing some of the productive day-to-day work and keeping those relationships alive. They're developing and maintaining systems to track the progress of the Main Street organization. So, you know, we talked about annual reporting earlier. That might be a good example of, they might be kind of putting in some of that day-to-day data that you are sending them. So if your job is to track, you know, the building investment, how many buildings have been worked on in the downtown, you might email the director during the day saying, hey, can you add this into our tracking system? Because I just found out today that 2 buildings got their facades updated, you know, so that's just a tangible example. They're also representing the Main Street program at the local, state, and national level. So especially when they're taking part in some of our networking opportunities, they're really representing you all. And so they're kind of giving a good idea of what's going on. They're coordinating the activities of the Main Street committees. So making sure that everyone is kind of staying on task, coordinating the efforts, making sure to connect people when needed. And they're facilitating the recruitment and management of volunteers. So whereas you all, again, might be doing the actual recruiting, they're helping facilitate those some opportunities, managing the volunteers, making sure maybe the volunteers know where to go if they're helping at an event, things like that. And the committee can also help the executive director with that. So the executive director can also supervise other additional staff if you happen to ever have any. Let's say your budget allows to have maybe that part-time marketing director or an administrative assistant. The executive director can supervise that person and they can manage that with that person on a day-to-day basis. So they can coordinate the staff responsibilities and hours. This also goes for like interns. If your organization ever allows to have an intern, the executive director can kind of be their supervisor. They also can review staff at 90 days, the 6 months, yearly kind of thing, just like you're doing that for them as well. And they can communicate with you on how that staff person might be doing. And that way, they can always come to you if there is any issues or if they need to fire a staff person after discussion with you. So really, again, looking at the overall role expectations, this is what typically falls within the role of the director. And this is kind of a large list. So I'm just going to name a few, but really, we see the executive director being a vision caster, being a facilitator and a coordinator. They're communicating with and among committees. They are double checker, they're checking things, they're making sure everything's in line. They are typically the liaison with the city. So they're sitting down maybe with the mayor, maybe them and the board president, or just them, it depends. They're managing staff, they're overseeing PR, day-to-day administration, and handling record keeping. So really, this is kind of a good overview of what you could expect from your executive director. They're also, motivating volunteers and committees. And some of those other pieces that I mentioned. You're good, Jackie. You can keep it on that. I was wrapping up. No, you're totally good. But yeah, so I would encourage you to go back and look at that list. And again, really just think about, is this what we're asking of our paid staff? And if it's more than that, and if you're asking maybe too much or some of your roles, then maybe that's something to think through. And this slide is helpful to think about, okay, what do we want to make sure we're not asking them to take on all the time? So really, again, they shouldn't be the sole fundraiser. That's really your job as the board. They shouldn't be taking minutes at a meeting. That really should be the secretary's job. They shouldn't chair, lead, or preside at the meetings. That's the chair's job. So they shouldn't be like, sometimes I've heard our executive director say, yeah, well, I have to be at every committee meeting because, otherwise things don't get done. Whew, that's not good. You should have committee chairs leading those meetings, and a board member should be aware of that happening. So the executive director shouldn't have to do the books. That's the accountant or the treasurer's job. They shouldn't have to voice their own opinion publicly unless it's consistent with the board. So that's something that's important, is there might be some disunity between the director and the board. And if that's happening, I encourage you to address that quickly, just so there isn't any negative outward public communication, I guess. So just be aware of that. Implement, committee they shouldn't have to implement the committee activities. That's what the committee is there for. They shouldn't have to write the whole newsletter or work on the whole website. That's why you have a promotions committee. So I guess, you can look at the rest of this and see there's pieces built into Main Street that essentially should protect the executive director from not have to doing all of this, and also you all not have to doing all of it. That's why you're a working board altogether with your committees and additional volunteers. So yeah.
And to piggyback off of that, in terms of what the board role in managing staff looks like, if your program is sustainable enough where you can hire staff, that's amazing. But don't forget that that staff needs support, and that's just another role for the board. So when it does come to the board's role in managing staff, just a few quick things to remember. The board is the one hiring and rewarding and terminating that executive director. The executive director then would be the one to hire or fire the rest of the staff. Of course, like Abby said, after talking with the board about those decisions. And the board chair is the day-to-day supervisor for the executive director. So just a couple reminders when it comes to the board's role in managing staff. And if you do have staff, with that should come performance evaluations. You definitely want to prioritize and plan for regular performance evaluations, at least annually, and set a time in the year so that your executive director knows when to expect it and it doesn't catch them off guard. It should come before the budget preparation, and it should never be an afterthought. I think we've all been in situations where it's better to have that ongoing feedback so that you're not caught off guard, and it doesn't evoke an emotional response, especially if we're talking about maybe some critical feedback. But the entire board should review the executive director in writing. So this might look like a questionnaire of sorts. And then the executive committee should review written responses. But the board chair, again, should be the one to actually conduct that evaluation with the executive director. But the feedback that's provided during that evaluation should come from the board as a whole. So that's just a note on performance evaluations. It should be more of an ongoing conversation, but definitely make sure you prioritize a time to set at least once a year to provide this kind of feedback. And then if you're an executive director watching this piece is for you. Or if you're a board member with paid staff, we do want to take the time to showcase the other perspective, which is that of the executive director. Here's what they're trying to do daily, and it's important that you as a board member are mindful of their objectives and expectations. So what they're trying to do every day is establish a line of communication with the board chair. Always please be welcoming to your executive director if they bring concerns or thoughts to you. The executive director, they have a mutually agreed upon list of tasks and who is responsible for what. So they're trying to get things done. They want to meet with the board chair regularly. They should be able to expect to do that. They want to have lunch, dinner, drinks with all of the board members at least once a year so that there is that relationship with the entire board. They don't want to play favorites with board members. Everyone, again, it goes back to that unified voice and that unified support. They don't want to have to play favorites. They want to ask board members to refer comments about their performance to the board chair. So unless you're the board chair, it's probably not appropriate for you to take feedback to the executive director directly. They would really prefer you to relay that information to the board chair so that they can then have a more intimate conversation because they're more familiar with one another. And they also want to insist on prompt evaluations. And so they would like to get help from the organization committee on that. But again, the board chair is really the one supervising that staff person. And then lastly, just a few things to add to that. They definitely want to review the letter of agreement or the contract before that performance review takes place. You want to set them up for success, right? And so it's just helping them feel prepared and making them feel like they know what to expect and have some consistency. They want to be able to come to you with suggestions about maybe what could change in the organization based on peer experience, especially if the executive director is the one from the organization attending a lot of our trainings. We may be delivering a message from the coordinating perspective that isn't quite reflected in the actual organization. So we are really encouraging you that when an executive director comes to you with a suggestion for what might be best for the organization, that you take that seriously and you really do take it into consideration. And again, that kind of ties into this last point. They really want to emphasize the lessons learned from peers in training. So they're trying to come to you with all of this information, and it's just, I think, helpful to know what the other perspective can look like sometimes. And then, of course, we want to talk about executive director retention. It is the responsibility of the board to retain a quality director. And so that can be done by providing constant feedback, by trying to show appreciation regularly, not just once a year in that annual review, but that ongoing feedback, letting them know they're doing a good job, because it can feel very isolating sometimes as the sole employee of an organization. Your executive director is always going to be your biggest volunteer. Even if you're paying them to work 40 hours a week, I don't think there's a single executive director in this program who only works 40 hours a week. It's very likely that they're putting in more time and effort on their work than you probably even know about. So just keep in mind that even if you are paying them, they're still your biggest volunteer. And the longevity of your executive director is really important for the health of your organization. Turnover costs real money. And as a nonprofit organization, you most likely are really trying to save cost where possible. And even beyond just the pragmatics of it costing money, constant turnover within an organization looks bad to the public. You don't want it to look like there's no stability there, and people want to be able to identify a person as their point of contact from the public. And, having that turnover, it just doesn't promote a quality image for the organization. So executive director retention is very important. And so to help kind of retain that executive director, you want to make sure you're helping them delegate tasks. It can sometimes be hard for someone to come to the board and say, or their board chair and say, I'm struggling. No one likes to admit that they're struggling or that they need help. That can be a really hard thing to do. So if you see that the executive director needs help with delegating tasks, that's really your role. Keep current on salaries and benefits, and make sure you're doing what you can to provide as competitive of a salary as possible. Stress the importance of professional development. Sometimes we put this on the back burner because we're so focused on just getting things done and crossing things off our list, but taking that time for professional development will make your executive director feel more valued. And then they can bring new ideas to the table and feel even more valued. Offer more vacation time. If you can't raise the salary, think about other ways that you as an organization can offer them incentives. And if you do offer more vacation time, insist that they take it. Make sure that they're not overworking themselves, because again, they're your biggest volunteer, and you want to make sure that you appreciate all of the time and energy that they're putting into this role.
Yeah, so, and then quickly, we just want to kind of hit on what the role is for the committees and some other potential stakeholders in your Main Street organization. And this is just good because, again, it helps keep things, everyone knowing what their role should be. So the committee should really be their volunteers. Typically, if you're a organization right now that only has board members on their committees, I would encourage you to start doing some really hardcore volunteer recruitment. Because the great thing about committees is it allows people to kind of get a taste of Main Street without having to be a full-fledged board member, but they might be a future board member. And that's good. That could be really good, because maybe you feel like you don't have enough people to serve. And I get that concern. I really do. I know some of you are coming from really small communities where there's a lot of need for volunteers. But if you kind of start giving people I call it the Main Street Kool-Aid, more people might be coming your way because they want to be a part of what you're doing. So make sure you start looking at having volunteers as your committee members. They're also energizers. They're typically the really nitty-gritty detail, make it happen people. So for all of your initiatives, they're making all of that come to life. They're also supporters of Main Street, so they're going to go out and support you to the public. They're collaborators, so they're going to come up with new ideas, help you continue to grow and meet a need. And they're implementing the plan with those, again, specific direction and tasks. And so, again, we emphasize you can have your committees under the 4 points, but this is not a requirement. So you can change that up if that's what you guys need. Another quick clarification for committee chairs. These are typically the leader, again, of that committee. Typically, they're a board member who is leading that committee, just so they can go basically back to the board and say, hey, this is what Economic Vitality is working on right now. And they can kind of, again, report what's going on. They're ensuring volunteers understand the overall Main Street effort. So again, this is going back to, you should know everything about the organization ideally as a board member. So you should be able to communicate that to your committee. And then you're able to seek help from the board if the task forces are floundering. So like if you feel like your committee is just falling apart, no one's being consistent coming to meetings, you're not getting things done, bring that to your board. There might just need to be some conversations that need to be had, some reworking of tasks, and then you'll be able to address that more head on. And then your volunteers. So obviously there's volunteers on the committees. You might also just have some people sometimes that are like, hey, we want to volunteer, but maybe just at this yearly event or just at this community cleanup day. But the great thing about those people is that, first of all, they're hands to help with what you need to get done. So you always want that. But they're also potential future board or committee members. So again, if they drink that Main Street Kool-Aid and they're like, oh, wow, that was really cool to get to be a part of their organization, I want to do that more, then maybe they'll come back and want to be on the board or something. They're also storytellers. They'll go back and tell people about your organization. They tend to be the more half committed. So again, you might not at the time get them to commit to being a committee member or something, but maybe down the road they can when they have some more time open up. There are also potential connections to other stakeholders in the community. And again, they're there to help. It's important to keep in mind that you should really be appreciating your volunteers, whether that's a sporadic volunteer or a volunteer who's on a committee. So make sure you're thinking of ways to do that. That might be a yearly volunteer appreciation gala. Maybe you have a big dinner and you do give out awards. Maybe it's just a thing on social media that does a volunteer highlight saying, hey, we want to say thanks to so-and-so for being a consistent volunteer for the past 10 years at this event. That means a lot to someone that you would take the time to say that. And so make sure you're doing that as much as you can. Then you have your municipality. So the municipality, it is so important that they are on your team. They will help with funding, they'll help with advocacy, with credibility, all of these pieces that are so important to overall, just again, sustainability. So really make sure that you have a good communication with them, whether that's whether you have like a mayor or a town manager or a town council, make sure they know who you are, not just the executive director, but the board members too. And honestly, what helps typically is making the mayor or town manager or town leadership an ex officio on your board to help with communication and transparency. I mean, even if the mayor just sends their, administrative assistant or someone to come take notes, it's still good because that keeps them up to date. If they're not an ex officio, maybe set up the executive director, if you have paid staff, or the board president, set up a meeting with them every so often to say, hey, here's what Main Street's doing. Here's why, you should keep supporting us, keep thinking about, giving more to us, because it's never bad to help brag on yourselves and say, this is some really cool things that we're doing. Jackie hit on this earlier, but keep showing up too to those council meetings, public hearings. It illustrates your presence to the community, and it ensures that Main Street's voice is heard in some major community decisions. I work with our CDBG team, our community development block grants sometimes, and I noticed that some of these larger grants that the town or city applies for through our federal funding, sometimes they impact maybe that downtown corridor, yet the Main Street's not really a part of the decision or the process in applying. So that's just an example, but I encourage you to make sure that you're a part of all those decisions, because you want to be, and you want to make sure that people know you're there and present. And then you have your downtown business owners. So really the downtown business owners they're the lifeblood of your downtown core. They're that economic vitality. So it's important that you listen to them, that you support them. They can be supporters, but they can also be naysayers. And I think probably a lot of you might be familiar with that, where there's some business owners that are like, what even is Main Street? I don't know what this is. And they might not be the biggest fan, but I promise over time, if you continue to build strong relationships and communicate what you're doing, they'll either come around or they'll start to be one of the only ones who don't like what you're doing because the rest of the business owners will be on your team. So they also might be on your board. You might be listening right now and you're like, I am a downtown business owner, and that's great. Though your perspective is invaluable to the Main Street process. So that's great if they're a part of either a committee or a board on the board. And again, Jackie said this earlier, but just keep creating spaces for business owners to network and connect with you and each other. That's a big part of Main Street's job. That will fall a lot under the Economic Vitality Committee. So if that's not on your work plan and you feel like that's struggling, that might be an idea for you.
So by the end of all of this, you might be feeling a little bit overwhelmed with information. Our intent is not to make you question why you elected to become a volunteer for your local program as a board member, but rather our goal is to give you a high-level overview of how all of these pieces work together. So we do want to end with this note on board burnout, and we encourage local organizations to be mindful of potential board burnout. So we have two pieces of advice in particular to help prevent board burnout. One, don't let a board member wear more than two hats. As a board member, you should always be wearing those two hats. One, as an officer, and then maybe another as a committee chair or a major event chair. So if you're watching this, definitely bring this to your board. No more than two hats, but one hat is always going to be that of an officer of the organization, but the other one might look different depending on the board member. Secondly, do not expect board members to give more than 4 to 10 hours a month exclusive of meetings. Board members should have a life too. And when we do our executive director orientation, we say the same thing. We know that this is a role and a responsibility that you've agreed to take on, but at the end of the day, you deserve to have a life too. So don't expect board members to give more than they've agreed to. So we hope, that you don't experience board burnout, and we hope that you know how much impact your role as a board member can have within your community. And we really are so grateful from the coordinating perspective that you've chosen to step up to the challenge and contribute your time and your expertise to your community. If there ever is an issue with board burnout, we encourage you to bring this up to the board president or the board as a whole, or you can bring it up to us at Indiana Main Street, and maybe we can help identify some ways to mitigate that. But keep in mind, revitalization does not happen overnight. This program and your role within it is intended to bring about incremental and sustainable change, which means prioritizing balance. It doesn't all have to happen at once. So don't wear too many hats, I guess is the point there. But on that note, that concludes our board member orientation. I hope that you've gotten a lot of value out of this. Here is our contact information. You can reach out to either me or Abby, or refer back to that community liaison map and contact your community liaison for any follow-up questions. We're always happy to come in person after COVID. Right now, we're not traveling as much, but we would generally be very happy to visit in person to talk with your board about some of these things, if that would be helpful. Abby, any last comments before we close out?
Not too much. I just wanted to say thank you for all that you do. I know it's a lot, and I know it can get tiring, especially throughout COVID. And just know that, truly, we here at the state are very honored to get to support you and just see the ways that you're impacting your communities. So know that we're champions of you. We're really proud to get to say that we're the Indiana Main Street, because you guys are truly doing awesome things. So thanks everyone for your time, and we look forward to hopefully connecting with you soon.
Thank you.